recently, the North Koreans have refused to even pick up the phone when the South Koreans tried to place calls at the border hotline. So it was significant to see Ri Son-kwon, the man in charge of inter-Korean relations for the government in the north, stepping over the border into the southern side of what's known as the Truce Village at Panmunjom, leading a 5-member team of high-ranking officials into a meeting with his South Korean counterpart.
Our talks resume after North and South Korean ties have been severed for a long time, but I believe the first step is half the journey.
We came to this meeting today with a serious and sincere attitude, and with the thought of giving our brethren, who have high hopes for this dialogue, invaluable results as the first present of the year.
The meeting did produce results, an agreement for North Korean representatives to attend next month's Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has dubbed them the Peace Olympics, and it's hoped that with its athletes in Pyeongchang, North Korea may be less likely to conduct any missile or nuclear tests. The United States and South Korea have already said they would put off any joint military exercises until after the Winter Games. South Korea also proposed more discussions on reunions for separated family members to coincide with the Lunar New Year next month, as well as military talks to diffuse tensions at the border. That talks between the Koreans are happening at all is seen by many in the South as a positive step.
I believe these formal diplomatic discussions can result in peace. Foreigners see the Korean Peninsula as a dangerous place that's under the constant threat of war, and I hope those concerns don't become reality.
But skeptics are concerned the talks won't do enough to resolve the major issue of North Korea's nuclear weapons program. South Korea says it mentioned denuclearization, drawing little response.
Their nuclear weapon development program is a threat to the regional and international community, and the United Nations has implemented very strict sanctions. So we need to maintain our stance that they need to abide by the resolution, as we have been asking them.
Still, Japan says it welcomes North Korea's change in attitude on attending the Winter Olympics. Kathy Novak, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
The first diplomatic talks between North and South Korea in 2 years are expected to begin just any moment. Reports suggest the meeting will focus on North Korea's potential involvement in the next month's Olympic Games. Talks could also lead to improving relations between the two nations. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, seems to be optimistic.
I think two countries can talk if they want. I think they're going to talk about the Olympics. It's not my understanding that they're going to talk about anything further, but, you know, those two countries have to get along. That's good for the United States if they can at least start getting back into talk. So I think that's a good thing.
For more on this, we're joined tonight by Nicholas Davies, author of Blood on Our Hands, The American Invasion and Destruction of Iraq. Mr. Davies, nice to have you with us tonight. Give us the lay of the land here now that there is a new president in South Korea. Moon Jae-in has got somewhat of a different approach, doesn't he?
Yeah, he was elected as a liberal and really as a peace candidate after the very conservative Park Chung-hee, who suspended talks with North Korea and closed the Kaesong Industrial Park about 2 years ago. So the South Koreans are going into these talks saying that they're ready to talk to North Korea about just about anything. And in particular, they want to talk about families separated on the two sides of the border. And they also would like to restart a military dialogue.
What do you think the political risk here? What do you think the political risk here is for the United States as far as, you know, keeping South Korea as a strong ally here? For instance, the war games versus nuclear suspension. What are your expectations?
Well, very clearly, however much the alliance with the U.S. means to South Korea, it's not worth having their country destroyed over. And so if there's really a chance for peace here, I'm sure the South Koreans want to go for it. And so as the South Koreans and the North Koreans talk to each other, if the South Koreans indicate that they may be willing to accept the framework that the Chinese have suggested, which is to say that the U.S. and South Korea stop practicing for the destruction of North Korea, and that on the other side, North Korea will suspend its nuclear weapons tests and its missile tests if South Korea indicates that it might be willing to go along with something like that. You know, this could really leave the Trump administration quite isolated and make it much harder for the U.S. to get other allies to support it in its aggressive stance.
But you've got Russia, the United States, and China all on the same page. They don't want North Korea to be in the nuclear community. They don't want them to have that capability. So South Korea, they're going to have to take that stand in these talks at some time or another, aren't they? Or is this just to get past the Olympics and then go back to where we were? What do you think?
Well, I think the South Koreans also know very well that historically North Korea has been ready to talk. The 1994 Framework Agreement involved completely giving up any kind of nuclear weapons program, and in exchange for a solid non-aggression pact and a solid peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula.
But since those years, since that decade, where's Gaddafi? Okay, that's got to be what Kim Jong-un is thinking about, that other people that have done deals weren't around very long once they gave up their program. Doesn't he view this as his real security, that this is something that he can't give up, and that's going to bring us to a decision of confrontation with this Trump administration? Final word.
Well, North Korea has been brought to that position. The Bush administration, led on these issues by Dick Cheney and John Bolton at the State Department, undermined the framework agreement. They also refused to pursue negotiations that were underway between the Clinton administration in which North Korea
that's the point that Trump has made. Nobody's approach has worked in 25 years, depending what the administration was. So hopefully these talks will do something. Nicholas Davies, it's nice to have you with us. Appreciate your time tonight on RT.
North and South Korean officials are set to meet tomorrow for the first time in like 2 years. And a spokesman for the South Korean government says they could talk about more than just the upcoming Olympics in South Korea. President Trump taking some credit for the talks, saying they wouldn't be happening if it weren't for his tough stance on North Korea. The president also saying that he's absolutely open to talking to the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un at some point. Rich Edson with the news. He's live at the State Department this afternoon. And this all happening while the United States is trying to isolate North Korea.
Shep, it has been for months. The Secretary of State has been trying to cut off North Korea economically, diplomatically, try to get other countries to remove their North Korean guest workers and get countries to sign on to UN Security Council resolutions. The U.S. at first was fairly skeptical, tried to downplay some of these talks. But then this weekend, the president tweeting basically that these talks were a result of his tough talk over Twitter and that perhaps he'd like to see good things come out of these discussions, though other administration officials are saying that they are watching these talks closely.
North Koreans are behaving out of fear. That is, they are very concerned that America, for the first time in an awfully long time, is serious about denuclearizing the peninsula. And I think they're trying to find a foothold, trying to find a place to reach out. And we'll just have to wait and see how the conversation's going.
The South Korean government says that it's trying to push a discussion of larger issues. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has been pushing for more talks, better relations between North and South Korea. As for the original intent of these discussions, North Korea has been saying it's likely they will send athletes to the Olympic Games in South Korea next month, Shep.
Some critics are sending warnings out about these talks.
Yeah, they are. Analysts are warning, some of them, that this is essentially an attempt by the North Korean dictator to drive a wedge between the United States and South Korea on this issue, with the ultimate goal of North Korea to get the U.S. out of Korea for the first time in 70 years. They also point to something the U.S. announced last week, that at the request of the South Korean government, the U.S. is suspending military exercises during the Olympics. The administration says that's because they want to free up the resources for South Korea so they can protect their country during the Olympics. But that is something, a suspension of those military exercises, that North Korea has been pushing for a long time, as have China and Russia. And the U.S. and South Korea have agreed to disband them for at least this one time and got nothing from North Korea out of it, Jeb.
All right. Thanks very much, Rich Edson at the State Department. Let's turn to Michael O'Hanlon now, Senior Fellow of Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael specializes in U.S. defense strategy and the use of military force. Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Shep. Happy 2018.
Yes, you too. How do you feel about this North Korea situation now?
Well, I think all of what you just said with Rich is correct, and there's one additional potential danger, which is North Korea just wanting to seem reasonable in the eyes of China and Russia, so the sanctions are loosened or not fully enforced. Having said all of that, I support them, because some degree of diffusing what's become an urgently dangerous crisis between one nuclear-armed country run by a dictator and then a very powerful alliance to the south. This has been, in many ways, the scariest thing in the second half of 2017 and to start the new year. So anything that gives us a chance of calming the tension is good. But let's not forget what happened in previous Olympic periods when people used the Olympics either as a cover for aggression. That's what Russia did in 2008 with the Beijing Olympics when it invaded Georgia, or when Russia then, after its own Olympics in 2014, annexed Crimea. So even if we get a couple months of a lull, we've got to have a strategy for what would then come next to make sure we're not taken advantage of, to make sure we don't squander whatever opportunity we may have for diplomacy.
And how do you work out that strategy? And once you get it together, how do you implement it?
Well, I think the key element here is we're not going to be able to fully denuclearize North Korea with the first deal. There's still debate on this. A lot of people don't agree with what I just said, but there are very few people who really believe that Kim Jong-un can be induced to give up his nuclear arsenal, even if the economic squeeze tightens. And very few people who think that China is really going to want to tighten that squeeze indefinitely. So I think we need to go for some kind of a verifiable freeze on the production of nuclear materials as well as the testing of nuclear and missile capabilities. And that needs to be our goal. We cannot give too much for that goal. It's a fallback for us from our earlier position of complete denuclearization. And we cannot legitimate or recognize the North Korean nuclear arsenal as official and legal. But an interim deal, I think, is going to be our best bet. And I think, it can probably at least prevent this crisis from getting worse and the North Korean nuclear arsenal from continuing to grow.
Let's hope so. Michael O'Hanlon, Happy New Year. Good to see you.
Thank you.
High hopes for this dialogue, invaluable results as the first present of the year.
The meeting did produce results, an agreement for North Korean representatives to attend next month's Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. South Korean President Moon Jae-in has dubbed them the Peace Place calls at the border hotline. So it was significant to see Ri Son-kwon, the man in charge of inter-Korean relations for the government in the north, stepping over the border into the southern side of what's known as the Truce Village at Panmunjom, leading a 5-member team of high-ranking officials into a meeting with his South Korean counterpart.
Our talks resume after North and South Korean ties have been severed for a long time, but I believe the first step is half the journey.
We came to this meeting today with a serious and sincere attitude, and with the thought of giving our brethren who have
Olympics, and it's hoped that with its athletes in Pyeongchang, North Korea may be less likely to conduct any missile or nuclear tests. The United States and South Korea have already said they would put off any joint military exercises until after the Winter Games. South Korea also proposed more discussion. Until recently, the North Koreans have refused to even pick up the phone when the South Koreans tried to